How's it going, everybody? My name is Joe, and welcome to Joverwatch. In this channel, I'm going to be taking a look at Overwatch League and doing some analysis videos, news videos, predictions, stuff like that. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. And so, with this first video, I'd like to take a look at the upcoming week of matches in the Overwatch League. And so in Stage 3, Week 4, the first game of the week that I'm going to be talking about is the Spark versus the Valiant. So the Valiant are looking really, really hot right now. Like, they just came off of the historic upset of toppling the Titans. And the thing about the Spark is that what they're very proficient at is running goats. Like, in their last match against the Seoul Dynasty, they ran almost nothing but goats and just happened to outplay Seoul. And so I'm thinking that the Valiant will be able to have a similar result as they did against the Titans against the Hangzhou Spark, because what the Valiant do really well is run Sombra goats and DPS comps to defeat the Goats Titans or whatever, and that's what they did against Vancouver. So I think that the Valiant will probably take this 3-1 or 3-2, but the Valiant aren't always the most consistent team in the league, so Hangzhou might give them some trouble. Hangzhou has also been on fire recently and have definitely had a resurgence in the last few of their games, because Godsby in particular has really, really stepped it up, and obviously Gushue has some of the best mechanical skill of any main tank in the league. So I'm interested to see how it plays out, but after the game against Vancouver, I'm really thinking that the Valiant has that. The next game on Thursday is Paris versus Seoul. Paris have had a resurgence recently, but I really don't think it's going to be enough to take down Seoul Dynasty. Like, Paris have looked better, but they also continue to lose to even mid-table teams. Like, they lost to Houston a little bit ago. So I really don't think this will be that special. I think Seoul will probably take it 3-1 or 4-0. But Paris does throw some DPS comps out there, and if they don't try to mirror goats into Seoul, then it might be more interesting, but I honestly just don't see that happening. And then San Francisco versus Chengdu. Chengdu does weird stuff all the time, so it might throw San Francisco off. But after that loss to Houston, San Francisco has come back with a freaking vengeance. So I don't think they're going to let anything slip, and I predict a 4-0 there. On Friday, London versus Valiant, I think will actually be really interesting, because the reason why Valiant was able to defeat Vancouver was because they beat Vancouver's goats and Sombra goats with DPS comps and Sombra goats of their own. London recently has shown us almost all DPS comps and not very much goats at all, really. So if this ends up being a DPS versus DPS battle, I'm really interested to see how it goes. I still personally think Valiant has the edge here, but I am very interested to watch this game and see how it goes, because it'll most likely be no goats at all, or not standard 3-3 anyway. Toronto versus Gladiators, not even going to be special, to be honest. That'll just be a 4-0 smashing for the Gladiators. Houston versus Washington. If this was before last week, I would have said that this was just going to be a 4-0 stomping and move on from there. But Houston lost to the Florida Mayhem, and I don't understand. And if they continue to play the way they did against Florida, then Washington has a chance here, which is baffling because Houston also defeated the Shock and rolled Boston and Paris. So I don't know what is going on with the Outlaws, but if the Outlaws go back to 2 weeks ago, then the Washington is just going to get stomped. But if they play like they did against Florida, it's not looking good for Houston. Then on to Saturday. Dallas versus New York is just going to be a stomp for New York. There's nothing really to say here. It'll just be Dallas playing goats terribly into New York playing Sombra goats and SBB getting more practice and getting better. Boston versus Philadelphia rematch, I think. That could be interesting. The first time around was relatively close, but Boston just dropped the ball so hard. They were one team fight away from taking it to map 5, I think, in their first meeting, and it was just honestly sad to see. What's happened to Boston is really confusing to me, because they were doing really well, and then they've slid all the way downward. They did just reverse sweep Paris, but if you have to reverse sweep all of your opponents, what is going on in your first halves? And Philadelphia is historically a very good second half team also, so I don't see a reverse sweep being pulled off against them. I think that Philadelphia will probably take it 3-1 or 3-2. I don't think it'll be a 4-0, but that could happen also. Boston hasn't looked great. Florida versus Hangzhou. Florida's just going to get annihilated 4-0. Shanghai versus Guangzhou. So, if you look at the records, you'd probably think that this wouldn't be a close game at all, and I still don't think it's going to be very close, but Shanghai uses only Somber Goats and DPS comps, while Guangzhou also throws a lot of DPS comps out there. So, with the DPS versus DPS matchups are always more volatile, I think, but Shanghai is just a better team overall. They're more coordinated, especially on maps that require any kind of 3-3 variant. They're really much better at that. So I think Shanghai has this 3-1 or 4-0. And then lastly, the games on Sunday will be, the first one is Gladiators versus Vancouver rematch. So the Gladiators held their own in the first half of their last meeting, and then got rolled harder than I've ever seen any team get stomped, to be honest. Like, it was really, really brutal in the second half, but the Gladiators did really hold their own in their first half of that game. And now we have tape of the Vancouver Titans losing to something that isn't better 3-3. Because I think the only team in the league that can produce better 3-3 than Vancouver is the San Francisco Shock, and that's the only reason they lost in the 3-3 meta. But now the 3-3 meta is sort of coming to an end, and if the Gladiators really switch it up, then I think they can definitely give Vancouver a run for their money. I'm not really thinking that the Gladiators are going to win, but I'd like to see the Gladiators take it 3-2. London versus San Francisco. Like I mentioned before, with London, they're recently switching it up to DPS comps a lot, so I do think that this can be interesting. But honestly, I think San Francisco is just really, really back in full force after that loss to Houston. That really didn't sit well with them, I don't think. So I think San Francisco is going to take this 3-1, 3-2. Houston versus Toronto. I have to see how that Washington versus Houston game goes. But if Washington versus Houston is a stomp from the Outlaws side, then I think Toronto is going to get stomped also. So if Houston are back up to form, then I think this will be a 4-0. If Houston aren't back up to form, then I'm really worried about that. And then lastly for this video, Chengdu versus Seoul, the final game of the week on Sunday. Seoul runs a lot of goats. Seoul is almost exclusively a goats team, and because of that, Chengdu always has their surprise factor. The Chung dudes and the Moo crew can always make something happen against Goats teams. It's not always very consistent, and it's not always the greatest strategy, but they always do something. So while Chengdu have been struggling recently, I do think they'll at least be able to take a map. I still think Seoul has it 3-1 or 3-2 though. And that will be the end of my predictions and reasons for them on the upcoming Stage 3 Week 4 of the Overwatch League. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you hit that like button and wait for more. Thank you. Have a good day.